Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Behind the Regs, hosted by myself, Nader, and my co host, Jack. Today is our second episode, and we've got with us our guest, Neil Badley. And we'd like to firstly start with knowing a little bit more about Neil and his journey to date in his interesting career.
Thank you. I'll go backwards if you like. I've been with Sweco, formerly MLM, for nearly 13 years now. And it's been a real privilege being with them. I was in local authorities, you hear, before that, but I got really exposed to some fantastic buildings working for them. But also what I've been doing there is I'm head of technical standards and learning and development. So I work on the technical standards. I troubleshoot on a lot of jobs, and then I do lots of training for our clients, but also a lot of training for our internally. And one of the things, I couldn't give you the exact figures, but we have got a big swathe of apprentices in our level 1 RBIs, and they're the people I'm most proud of, and their development and the future of interesting. So I just have a brilliant job, to be honest. The variety of what I do is massive, and no day's the same. Prior to that, as I said, I was in local authority till I was 55, and I was at Wokingham Unitary Authority for 13 years. Went there as building control manager. During that time, I got onto the LABC board. I was chairman of the Central Region. Worked with some fantastic chiefs around Berkshire. But also while I was there, I made my way up the management chain. So when I finally left local authority, I was kind of like an operations director for pretty much all the front-facing stuff. It was a unitary authority, so I got nothing to do with education or social care. They were the big hitters there, budgetary-wise. But yet, anything you might associate with the district council, I was kind of the operations director over those things. So that's where I got to. And to be honest, I was just tired of austerity when I got to 55. The constant cycle of trying to save money when you save money the year before and then they come back for more. In the end, I was just drained. And then prior to that, I was with an authority called Rushmore, which is Farnborough and Aldershot. And I was there for 13 years as well. That was through the recession, but I was really fortunate to be at Rushmore. Although it's not like working in one of the big conurbations with really tall buildings and stuff like that, I got to work on lots and lots of shopping malls, which at the time were about as complex as you could get if you weren't working on tall buildings. And I worked at that time as well. The fire authority had resource, and I spent almost as much time with the fire prevention officers as I did with building control officers, and I learned an awful lot from that. Prior to that, that's quite a long time, isn't it? How many years is that? That's about 4 years. Prior to that, I bobbed around quite a number of local authorities, making my way up the career chain. I came in straight from school, ONC, HNC. Then I did my Institute of Building Control exams, got into the Institute of Building Control. So while I was doing all that, I went around a number of authorities. The thing I always say, when I started, I would have sacked myself now, because back then it was a real mixed bag. If anybody says it's not like it used to be, they're quite right. But you shouldn't be looking at it with rose-colored spectacles. There was a reason in 1984 why the private sector was enabled through the Act, and that's because local authority building control was good and it was bad. And there was a political imperative to bring choice in because they felt the service wasn't quite right in local authority. I'm not damning everybody, but if everybody says, oh, it was brilliant back then, I'd say it was a mixed bag, always has been, good and bad.
Ooh. Interesting thoughts here. Interesting. Right. Jack, I'll hand over the mic to you now, Jack.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Neil. Also, just for clarity, these views are your personal opinions, not reflective of
yes,
your
absolutely.
employer.
Yeah.
So to start us off with, approved document B, what is it, what's it for, and how is it supposed to be used?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I just mentioned the Building Act 1984. Not only did it bring in the ability to have private sector building control, but also brought in the functional requirements. When I started back in 75, of course, the building regulations were prescriptive. And that the prescriptive nature of the regulations, industry was saying, and it's always been the case, every government wants the industry to build more. And the industry is saying, look, because of the prescriptive nature of regs, we cannot innovate. If we can't innovate, we can't build more. So that brought about the change from prescriptive regulations to the functional requirements. So they brought in the functional requirements, which we all know are in Schedule 1 of the building regulations. But then the vast rump of practitioners say, well, how do we comply? How do we comply? Because you've taken away the prescriptive regulations that told us. So then you got the approved documents come into place. And it was a set of guidance to show you how to meet the functional requirements. That was the thing. And the original approved documents all said, more or less, if you follow this guidance, it would tend to show compliance.
Is that true, though?
Well, and that's, if you say since Grenfell, to me, what is the single biggest change in terms of the approved documents? It's the fact at the beginning now, it says, if you follow this guidance, it doesn't necessarily show compliance.
That's why I said,
and it's just an absolute massive change. Now, you could say that change has actually aligned the approved documents with the other underpinning bit of the Building Safety Act, that everybody's kind of liable for their incompetence now. So if you're a designer and you want to use an approved document, you've got to understand whether the guidance in that approved document is appropriate for your design. Now, and going back to what Jack, this is my view, and certainly it's what I put in. I think approved document B has lost its way in a sense because it tries to be everything to every man. So, and that's why they've got to say you've got to work out whether this guidance is appropriate or not. Certainly, I think approved document B, personally, should be limited in scope to low-rise buildings that are traditionally constructed, and then they could go back to say, if you build in a low-rise building, traditionally constructed, if you follow this guidance, it would tend to show compliance. But there's loads of bits in there. It drives me wild, actually, and has driven me wild, that people often misuse the guidance because they're using it on buildings that are inappropriate. The one since Grenfell, the majority of my real work has been reclads. And there's a bit of guidance that you'll all be familiar in around cavity barriers that says around openings, you've got to have a cavity barrier. And then it goes on to say you can have 0.5 mil steel, 38 mil timber. Now, I've had that on reclad projects where they've tried to use that piece of guidance to say that would be appropriate cavity barriers around. And I just say, no, it's not. That piece of guidance is for low-rise, traditionally constructed buildings. It's not appropriate for the kind of form of construction that you're using. Now, it's still in there. I was fairly annoyed when they kept that guidance in the latest version of 9991, but at least in there it qualifies it and says this guidance is only appropriate for low rise. So why on earth is it in 9991? Because really 9991 is for taller buildings, but there you go. So it's that kind of thing. You've got to understand the root of the guidance if you're going to use the guidance. And if you're looking at approved document B, broadly speaking, most of it comes from the post-building war studies from World War II. And so, and of course, they really understood how traditional construction worked under stress after World War II because of the amount of stress buildings that came from the number of fires we had because of the number of attacks we had on our cities. So the interfaces, all the issues that we have now with modern methods of construction, how do we understand how that interface worked? It was really well understood. So they could write approved documents based on traditional construction. If you followed it, you would tend to show compliance. Now, over one of the mistakes they made in 1984 when they brought in the approved documents was not to put in competence. as a requirement. Bring that accountability in, because the misunderstanding was it brought about flexibility, but with flexibility you need more competence. If you say do it this way or you don't do it, no competence involved in that, you do it that way. And so there's been this massive shift in terms of what an approved document is for, how you can use it. You've got to understand the route.
Another question, Neil, and I think just for maybe some of the people who will be watching this or listening to this, just to have a better understanding as well. Yourself and I and Jack, we all know that you've got the legal requirement, which is in the approved documents would normally be in the green box at the top of the section, requirement B1 or requirement B2 or B3. So the legal requirements, some of them, that the wording is adequate and reasonable provisions.
Yeah.
And that's the legal requirement. So my question is, how many times in your career have you been challenged on the guidance with someone that maybe thought something else could be adequate and reasonable outside the scope of the guidance?
I'd say it has become more and more common, and again, I think now we're in the world of the Building Safety Act. It's that's fine for somebody to do that, but actually now, it's explicit, the actual responsibility. It always was, but it's explicit now under the Building Safety Act. The responsibility for the compliance of the design of construction lies with the client, principal designer, principal contractor, designer, contractor. And so if somebody wants to say that to me now, I'm happy with that. But they've got to tell the whole story. They've got to tell the whole story. And when and I think this applies, and I understand hopefully the listenership to this will be across all sectors. So I'm not just talking about large jobs now. If you're talking to a PD now on, say, a small residential extension, they should tell the whole story. They get the brief from the client. So what guidance are they going to use and why is it appropriate? Now, that's relatively simple to record for the first time, but you've got to start from there. You can't just say, I'm going to use this guidance. That's the point.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to go beyond, so I'm not going to use this guidance. I'm going to assert that this particular detail, it would meet the functional requirement. You make that assertion, but how are you going to back it up?
Yes.
And are you competent to back it up? And if you're not competent to back it up, who are you going to use as part of your capability, as it were, to substantiate it? Is a specialist engineer? What testing have you got behind it to do it? Is that test appropriate to substantiate it? So I think more and more now, compliance is a story. It's not just the end. You've got to start from the root and work your way all the way through to say, yes, this is an appropriate way to design. Okay, we can do the detail now. I mean, the other thing, if you're talking to your clients, to the duty holders you work with, of course, the extension of defective premises now to 15 years on any job. You can just see now if people are coming along at a later date to do a material alteration on an existing building that's been built under this regime, and what they uncover is something to them that doesn't comply. Now, where are they going to go to get that? What's their legal recourse to get that put right? Where are they going to get the financial wherewithal? And I think it's really critical for your duty holders now to be able, if challenged, to go back and tell that story. Look, we mapped this all out. What we designed, what we constructed, and we have the evidence that it did comply at the time of construction. And you can see by the way we did it, we took all reasonable steps to ensure it did. So I think this change in process, if you like, in design process and the way you document it, and this is what we're corroborating now as registered building inspectors. That's our role, if you like. It is at the end of the day to look at that whole story from beginning to end, the final detail, and say, yes, we think that is a viable way of meeting the functional requirements.
With some of the changes that have been made to approved document B since the Grenfell inquiry, how do you feel they have worked within the industry? Do you think some have been detrimental and not necessarily helped with compliance and just made things a bit more complicated for the principal contractors and principal designers to get things right? Or what's your view with that?
I think clearly in that little period after Grenfell, or well, it was quite an extended period actually, the whole debate about single staircase and not above 18 metres was extremely confusing and detrimental to everybody. You got everybody wading in. You got, Gove made his statement that he was going to make it illegal. You got the opinion paper by the National Fire Chiefs Council that everybody didn't see the opinion bit. They just thought, oh, well, that's it. You got planners making policy on it that actually then overrides what's in. So, I think that was really, really detrimental as far as that was concerned. Also, at that time as well, we got the draft 991 that actually, although it suggested you shouldn't have single staircases over 18 metres, it had a whole set saying, but if you do and you do this, it could be okay. So there was a shed load of confusion, plus the fact that the building safety regulator was coming in and you got the gateway process and everyone was saying, how are they going to deal with this? And so you've got to, and I think that did a lot of damage in holding things back, and that the uncertainty around that. I think a number of the other changes, I think everybody recognises actually that something had to happen after Grenfell. It's inescapable. Those 72 deaths weren't the fault of the people who died. It was the fault of the industry. And that's everybody, compliance included. When you look at it, and it, certainly, I've seen the evidence. Grenfell just happened to be the fire. There were lots of other buildings that could have been the fire, and I've certainly worked on a couple where I think if that had been a fire, that would have been worse. I had one that was over 30 metres when it was a reclad pretty soon after Grenfell had the same Rainer Bond cladding on, so the client knew it had to come off. They weren't waiting, it had to come off. When I was pricing up the job, looked at the fire strategy, it was over 30 metres and it had been built without sprinklers. So I went back to them and said, look, I include sprinklers in this or find somebody else.
Retrospectively?
Pardon? Yes.
Retrospectively?
Yes. Well, ethically, I just said I don't want to go anywhere near it. This building should have had sprinklers. So you can go to somebody else if you want, but if we give you a price for the reclad, sprinklers have got to go in. We'll ask me about 4.3 in a minute. So anyway, the client looked at it, and I think they thought ethically we got to wait sprinklers into this building. So anyway, the reclad's going on. I'm looking at sprinkler installation, steel frame building. I think I was up on about the 13th floor. I'm looking at the sprinkler installation. I said, something's wrong here. And I had to close my eyes. When you're doing inspections and you're focused on one thing, so you can't see the wood for the tree. So you have to refocus, open your eyes again. Anyhow, I was looking at naked steel, 90-minute building, no fire protection. Wow. I said to the sprinkler guy, is it like this on every fund? Said, we think so. So we went down, phoned the client, you got a real problem. So no sprinklers, no fire protection. We've had 2 timber frame buildings over 18 metres residential. How did they get built? These are reclads that we've done. We had another one where it was a structural SFS, and we had the surveyor on the job just picked up it hadn't got fire resistance from the outside in. It was structural. Again, the client, had real difficulties with it and said, well, no, you can't have a structural member that hasn't got fire resistance from both sides. So, no, the modular buildings we've had that we've had to do on reclads, again, not good. So, all of these changes were needed, and so they've broadly been accepted. and they're good. I don't know, the wayfinding, the problems fire brigades were having when they were turning up, not being able, getting into the stair course and not being able to find the floor, or when they come out of the staircase they're in, knowing which way to go to get to the flat that's got the fire. That just makes sense. The premises information box, again, absolutely critical. Residential buildings, they're generally not 24-hour managed. So if the fire brigade turn up, they're going to turn up cold. How are they supposed to know, actually, where everything is for them? Are they... Pardon?
All of these things that you're just explaining now or talking about, these changes, they just recently came, just post Grenfell.
Yes. But the question Jack asked me, have any caused any problems, to be honest? What I'm saying is, I think most, other than a single staircase bit, I think actually, in most cases, the actual changes to the guidance are kind of understood. And the contractors, the designers, understand the justification behind them. You can have an opinion whether we've actually got too many fail-safes, because of course the key issue in Lacanal and then with Grenfell is one, the premise that Stay Put was running is the fire's going to stay in the compartment, and we'd lost the knack of maintaining buildings so that the fire would stay in the compartment, because if the fire stays in the compartment, to be frank, in most occasions it'll burn itself out. So long as the people in the flat get out, it's going nowhere. The problem with the fire source at Grenfell was put out, but the external wall was incorrect. It started self-propagating. So once the fire was out in the flat, it carried on. Well, B4 looks, the 8414 test, the way it tests, looks to see that the fire won't continue to propagate in the wall if it goes out, So with the 8414 test, with the big two meter opening and the big fire club, if you ever go to one, they're ferocious old fires. But in there, one of the criteria for the failure of the test is if for the first 15 minutes for more than 30 seconds, somewhere you've got thermocouples all across the rig, you record a temperature of more than 600 degrees centigrade, you fail. Now that's because the fire, if they put the fire out at that point, the wall will carry on burning. It's reached a temperature that it will self-propagate. So all of these, the big issue, is that we as an industry and also as people in management of buildings, we've failed in that first thing. If that principle that Stay Put is based on, the fire stays in the fire compartment, one stair's okay.
Yeah.
You don't need a fire evacuation system. All of these other things that have come in since, they're secondary. It's saying, well, the principal thing we put in to stop the fire spreading and keep people safe is going to fail. So we need built-in redundancy. We need a second staircase. Now, again, the industry has failed. And so you can understand why government politically has to put the layers in of redundancy that they're putting in.
It's an interesting one, and I can see why they may deem a second staircase as a bit of a fail-safe. But in reality, getting these compartments should be right. The principal contractor should have the right skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours to make sure that what they're actually doing is going to give that amount of time.
I think it's also post-occupation, the management as well, keeping that compartment intact. So obviously, inspecting the fire doors regularly or periodically. It's a combination of, since the start of putting the plans together all the way up to occupation and post-occupation, that it's the whole equation that makes it work.
And Nader, I think you're absolutely right. And again, this is another one of the emphases that I think Dame Judith put on was this management of information. And, you know, again, I paraphrase it really, but I think, you know, she looked at the information that was being passed to clients to manage their buildings afterwards, and she found the stuff impenetrable, inaccurate. And just not really fit for purpose. And certainly, again, the way things are being set up now, this management of information all the way through from, I don't know, REBA 2, right from the very beginning now, you track all these design decisions. And part of that tracking is whoever your client is saying, yes, if you go down that route, whatever the residual risk is in terms of management, testing, maintenance, we can handle that. When it's so right the way through, that's what you're tracking, and it's very interesting in the prescribed documents, isn't it? You've got the fire and emergency file goes in with prescribed documents at Gateway 2. It's a genius document because it does track all that. But before they're even making the Gateway 2 application, the clients have to make a statement almost that we understand the residual risk. Here's our fire safety plan. They've got a plan to manage it. They haven't even made the application. Now that's the right way round. Historically, you know, have a look at that and think about how you're going to manage the building now, and the place is complete. I mean, I think, you know, just a little nuance of the way this year they changed the process for Regulation 38. It's absolutely clear the responsibility for this information is with you, principal contractor, and you, client. Principal contractor, give it to the client. Client, confirm you're happy to the principal contractor. Now, principal contractor, go to your registered building control authority and approver, and say everything's okay. Now, that's a tick in the box. You're moving closer to being able to get your final certificate. But it's put the emphasis for compliance, the emphasis for information, the emphasis of saying that information is fit for purpose on the duty holders rather than on the RBI to go through reams of stuff and say, is this good enough?
The problem is the duty holders still don't have the grips of what their duties are.
Yeah. I think we, in a sense, they have a criminal responsibility to understand what their duties are. Well, I think as a sector, we have a responsibility to talk to our clients, to help them, to train them in the legal aspects of what they're doing. I was doing a talk the other day to a contractor, and the contractor made exactly that point and said, who are going to bring the clients into line on this? And I pointed out to the contractor, that's your duty, because one of the duties you've got as principal contractor is before you start work on a job, you have to satisfy yourself that the client understands their duties. So if you're telling me they don't, why are you working for them? Now, I understand that's a commercial issue and it's a fine thing, but actually the law is actually fairly clear. Who's got to bring the clients into line? It's the principal contractor. They shouldn't start working for them if they think their client doesn't understand their duties. And also there's a duty on the PD to talk to the client as well. If the client needs advice, you talk to them. So that, again, it's not a nice to have this communication throughout the project now for the duty holders. It's written into the building regulations. You have to communicate.
A recent LABC conference earlier this week where there was a couple posts on LinkedIn. One which stated that Dame Judith Hackett had made the comment that building control bodies or registered building inspectors should be providing advice. Now, I think that may have come across a bit of a confusing one, as I don't think it's necessarily aimed at design advice, but more so compliance advice. Because obviously, as a registered building inspector, we don't provide design advice, but more so compliance. So if someone was to say, does this comply? It's, that's what we can sort of get involved in. But if someone was to say, how can I make this comply? That's where a bit of a line's drawn.
Yeah.
I think someone clarified that. I think someone I think there was a lot of posts on LinkedIn about this, but I think someone, and I don't remember the name, came up and clarified that the context when she gave that statement out, it was the context when if if a client was served with a contravention, you'd need to advise them whether, like, where in the guidance or which requirement and the guidance under that requirement, that is the sort of advice that you need to give them for them to be able to rectify that contravention. I think that was the context of how that statement was put out, and then maybe people perceived it in a. But you tell us, Neil, how did you see it, or did you?
I have to admit, I missed that one. I know, again, in one of the consultations when we were talking about that, it's always been a dilemma in building control. Exactly how far do you go? Are you being directive or are you giving advice and stuff like that? And it has always been a dilemma, and not to say things in such a way that it could lead you liable. So this isn't a new thing with the Building Safety Act. The thing I always say about registered building inspectors or building control officers throughout the years is we're different to, say, contractors, and we're different to designers, in the sense that at any given time, say, a designer will be working on, I don't know, 3 or 4 jobs. At any given time, a contractor will probably be working on one job. Now, at that same moment, at Sweco, we've got a fairly low ratio. We have about 40 jobs per person. But even at that low ratio, so for every 3 a designer do, we do 40. Every 1 a contractor does, we do 40. So actually, our breadth of our experience, our breadth of exposure to the use and solutions that might meet it. And why throw that out? Why throw that intelligence out of the process? Now, how you use that intelligence is really important. So you're not actually directing design, but perhaps you're giving opportunity for solutions. And I think, I know there's a whole nuance of words around this, but I think it's really important that we don't throw away our intelligence, and the industry doesn't benefit from the intelligence, the experience we have of working on far more projects than probably any other discipline. So, and Jack, it is about compliance, but there are routes to compliance, and I don't think there's any problem if you say, God, you can't use approved document B. Well, what can we use? Well, really, you should be using 9999. Now, what's the problem with that? What is the problem? That we haven't said, and do this because you're doing 9999, but that, and it's that kind of thing that I think is really important for us to keep doing, to keep helping people work towards compliance. You just have to be careful not to be directive.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to be seen as the people telling people what to do or how to do it, but to give direction on to, have you considered looking at that, or rather than do this,
Yes.
signposting, I wouldn't necessarily say is designing, but leading someone to the place of information for them to then make an informed decision. Is that going to work for my particular project?
I think using the guidance as it should be used, which is guide people to the guidance, but guide them to where in the. Don't just tell them go and look in the approved documents. If someone, for example, comes back and say, I posted a post on LinkedIn before about ventilation, a room, an extension that's been built, and there was no background ventilation. And when the client came back to me and said, "All right, can I put trickle vents?" I said to him, "You can achieve background. All you need is achieve background ventilation. It can be achieved by trickle vents. It can be achieved by a hole in the wall with a controllable function in it. But there are different ways to achieve background ventilation, not necessarily just a trickle vent, because it might be a small window that a certain trickle vent might not achieve the minimum required ventilation rate, for example, the 8,000 millimeters squared or whatever. And I think it's not design advice, it's telling them where in the guidance they should be looking, and then propose what they're going to be doing on site. Is that more? Would that be in line with maybe your thoughts, Neil, or how you would?
I don't think I've got any problems. To be honest, while you're talking, the other area I was thinking about. I mean, every time I read Part L, I almost change my mind. So I mean, and I think that's another area we can help with, because for people who don't read the guidance that often, we've got a role almost to explain it. What in terms of retained thermal elements, or if you're refurbishing a thermal element, or you've got a change of energy status and stuff like that, reading through that bit of exactly what you've got to do. Every time you look at it, is this being dealt with under Regulation 23, or is it just staying with 4.3? How are you going to do it? And that is an absolute minefield in terms of some of the guidance is not the clearest in the world. So I think that's another role that we have in helping people actually understand this is what the guidance is asking you to do. Yeah.
Yes, completely agree. I completely agree with that.
Actually, I mentioned 4.3. That's one of my other passions. Do you want to hear my view on 4.3?
Yeah, absolutely.
Material alteration.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Commonly known as the no worse rule. And again, when I got really passionate about this was because we've done well over 200 reclads since Grenfell, so we've done a lot of them, and it's this. We were going along, and people were trying to retain certain elements in the wall that it never ever complied, and their justification for retaining these elements in the wall was saying, "Well, we're not making any worse." And I said, "Well, it never complied at the time it was constructed. How can you say that complies when it's no worse and never ever complied in the first place?" Yeah. And so I think that the way I look at 4.3, and people may well disagree with me, but the 4.3 ethically, it starts off with you try and meet the current guidance. That's the first bit. But if you can't, so that's your first thing. But if you can't, then I think the rest of it assumes that it complied at the time of construction. So if you're going to make it no less compliant, or no worse, as it were, it's no worse than it complied at the time of construction. So if you've got something that never ever complied, you benchmark, you then say, well, if it had been built right at the time, this is what it would have looked like. Now it's no worse than that. But the number of times people just say, well, we're not making any worse, and I don't like that at all. If it never ever complied, then actually the building regs is not about uplift, but if it wasn't built correctly, then you should be at least bringing it up to that standard, and then it's no worse than that.
Isn't there another caveat on a 15-year rule as well, though, which people may try to argue?
I mean, as you know, we all sign up to our various ethical codes, and I would say that's someone trying to game their responsibility. To be honest, we always have a choice, don't we? Do we take on? Well, sorry. If you're in the private sector, you've got a choice, and if somebody played that, well, if that's your view, fine, find somebody else. We just wouldn't go down that route. We're interested in buildings that comply with the building reg, not routes to make it easier for you to do what you want to do.
Because I will have to leave this very interesting podcast quite soon. So I just wanted to ask a question before I leave to attend another meeting. And to that same point that we were still talking about being not compliant before, what do we do on listed buildings?
I think this is, so even I wasn't working before 1965, which is when the building regs came in. When I started the first office, there were copies of the building bylaws in there, but that was there. So pre-65, which I would imagine most listed buildings are going to be, there were no building regs anyway. So if we talk about the buildings that are pre-65 that aren't listed, they're kind of traditional construction. So you can take a view on whether, it's a relatively robust, traditionally constructed building. But so there you've got no regulation regulations to take that view of no less compliant on. With listed buildings, pretty much all the approved documents say that you don't need to follow this guidance if it actually is going to remove the historical interest of that
Yes.
building. Now, just because it says that, and this is again going back to something we were talking about earlier, just because it says that, that's not the end of the process. Because, well, we don't have to do anything. He says we don't have to do anything. Well, if you don't have to do anything, then the owner, how are they going to manage the building? Because you've identified a risk that you've not been able to mitigate through the construction process. So now, owner, this is a risk you've got to mitigate in your management. Now, I don't know, if you're dealing with the National Trust building, then generally when it's open, they've got people walking the floors all the time. So there's ways of building in additional layers of fire precaution through the management of the building. But I think it's no good just saying, well, the building regs or the guidance says we don't have to do anything. I think the designer then, and also on the first podcast you had, I can't remember which of the lads said it, be inquisitive. And I think that's right. So, okay, you don't, but how are you going to manage it? Have you, designer, contractor, let the management know this is an issue that you can't put right, so they've got to manage that issue. That should become almost part of the regulation, or 38, if it's a regulation 38 applies, which it won't if it's a material alteration, it won't. But this should be part of the information you're passing to them. And then they should mitigate it through their management kind of policies and plans.
Here's one for you, which is a bit of an annoyance of mine with a material change of use. We can get some older buildings with low-level windows, which could be converted into flats. Why would approved document K not be applicable for a change of use? For, if we're keeping people safe in and around buildings, is approved document K not relevant for keeping people safe in or around the building?
Yeah,
Especially if it's being changed into something like a flat. There's children. You might have children living there.
I think there's two things again, and I think the designer, the contractor, have got to look at it about the appropriateness. Now, the regulation's saying you don't have to, but is that appropriate? And actually, if you question the designer, do you want to be stood up in court in 3 years' time because a child went through that window and he's dead? And justifying on the back of, well, that said I didn't have to. Well, it said you didn't have to, but why didn't you think about the consequences of not having to? So again, I think more and more now with the emphasis on people's competence and the accountability of people, you can make a case in situations like that and say you need to. Now, from your point of view, as a registered building inspector, you can log that. That could be part of your tracker. If they come back and say you can't enforce that, you could say that's fine, but that note that I advised you is there forever. So actually, if you're stood in court next to that designer, you'd be able to say, well, I advised them at the time, but unfortunately, the law didn't allow me to enforce that, but I advised them strongly that it was their duty to do something about it.
Yeah, I think it is one of the main things I always consider, and it is an advisory note as such. But I think a lot of principal designers do take it on board and make a lot of changes. It's just the ones where they are dangerously low. And it's just down to cost of, well, the client doesn't want to replace it. They may be on board to upgrade it, the principal designer, but the client doesn't want to burden the cost of it.
Yeah.
But
again, my advice to the principal designer that you record the fact that you suggested this should be done and that it was the client's decision that it wasn't going to be done.
If there was one thing you could change about the industry for building control, what is it? What is it you'd like to do, or what
Good
could
question,
be done?
Jack, that one.
God, that is a good question, isn't it?
That's a good question, Jack.
The one thing I'd like to change now is sort the resource issue out. And of course we can't. We can't. That's going to be a slow burner. But I think everyone has got that responsibility to take on the joy of apprentices, get them in, get them trained. And then the resource issue hopefully will resolve itself, I don't know, in 6-7 years. I think it's that slower burner because you don't become a competent RBI that quickly. And in saying that, I'd also say to everybody, it is a joy. If you get the right apprentices in your organisation, they give as much as they take, and it's a real pleasure working on them. So that would be my passion: get the resource level right. I mean, it might be career-wise being quite nice to be in a market where demand is greater than supply. But I think in terms of what we try to achieve, what we're trying to do for the built environment, there are too few of us. Massively too few of us. So if you ask me, that would be the biggest thing I'd like to see, sort out the resource issue.
It's very interesting your view on that, Neil. It's quite interesting your view on that, to be fair, because some people will disagree and say we don't have a resource issue. It's just how the tasks are allocated that has made the resource issue of an RBI. Maybe doing more than what they should be doing.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I don't think I just from our point of view, and the reality is at the moment the flux, the recruitment and retention issues that we've got since our profession became a protected profession, and then inspectors became, we used to run at a really, really low rate of flux. That's not the case at the moment, and I would imagine most building control bodies have that same issue at the moment, recruiting and retaining. So I would say the indications from the market are that there's not enough of us. You're quite right in the sense that you can always look at any profession and say you could do this more effectively. And that process is non-stop. It's never ending. The way we do our work now compared to the way when I started in 75 or even in 85 or in 95 or, in 2005, every decade it changes, it moves on. And with the use of technology that's about now, the way we're recording, the way we're doing stuff is a far cry from even a decade ago, really. So I think the efficiencies are coming in all the time. Oh, by the way, one of the things that I really again like this notion, I think, of the way the building safety regulator looks at inspections. For years, ever since I started, you rocked up on site, you were asked to go and see something, you'd be escorted by the person, if it's a big site, to what you're going to look at, and then you look at other stuff that you wanted to look at. Now, the way of inspecting for the BSR is go to the site. So you got your construction control plan. This is what you say you do up to this point. Yes, you said you'd record all the compliances up to this point, your closures this way, have you? Yes, let's have a look at those. So you look at the evidence they've gathered of compliance. Then you say, all right, let's go and look at that evidence, and you corroborate the evidence they've complied. So rather than inspecting first, you actually inspect their evidence, not the building. And I think that's a smarter way of working. And also it affirms that the responsibility for compliance lies with the contractor, not by the inspector coming out and inspecting the works.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of working. I think when we do look at bringing in new staff as well, though, to go back to that, how do you think things are going to work when it comes back to re-registration time and everybody's rushing to do that? do you not think a lot of the people that weren't too keen to register first off are now going to go, yeah, I'm not going through that hassle again. It's time to
To
jump
go.
ship or move on.
Yeah.
I suppose that will be a personal choice. You could look at it and see, well, they've been through it once, so they understand the process. So it should be easier the second time round. And, on the other hand, I can understand, people who are getting on might just think, well, it's just not worth the hassle anymore. You're going to get that. But that's why I think it's important that we not only, replenish at a rate that is taking out the people who are leaving the industry, but at a greater rate. So that actually the number of registered building inspectors grows. You're always going to have some people who are leaving the industry for whatever reason, and it won't just be about re-registration. Again, I think we're fortunate at SWECO because we're a larger organisation, so we can support people in that re-registration process. And assist them in gathering the information and stuff like that they're going to have to put together, having the appropriate, making sure their portfolio work is appropriate for whatever level they want to re-register at, and the stuff like that. So I think there is a part for organisations to play if you're large enough to assist people, know your people. If you've got people who you think might be reluctant to go through it again, but you think they're good, this is their nervousness about being interviewed rather than actually their competence, then, target them, work with them, help them, remove their fear, give them the confidence to go through the process again.
Yeah. Retaining people in the industry is definitely key to build building control back up again, because we need the experienced surveyors to train the trainees. I know when I first started, I got to work with a lot of good surveyors. From moving on to the private sector, I feel like I've learned like a crash course in how things were different from what I previously did, to how much more information I'm putting in site notes, how much more I'm seeing when I'm going there, rather than
Yeah.
going there with sort of blinkers on, just focus on one set piece. Now I'm taking a much larger approach on how things are going to all work together. I love what I do, to the point where my brother, who'd worked, I think, 13, 14 years in the same job, decided to leave and come as a trainee to building control himself, because I constantly tell him what I do and how I enjoy doing it. But I think something is missing with likes of college or university, of telling people about our industry. I think it gets missed. I'd never really heard of building control. It wasn't a career path I was actually looking to go down. I'd started a residential surveying qualification. It was only when I joined CABE as a trainee member that I got an email about the LABC trainee course. And that's when I thought, that's kind of like residential surveying. I'll do that to go alongside. And now I've stuck with building control. But
I think,
needs more exposure.
Jack, I've never known anybody who wanted to be a building control surveyor at school.
I
No,
was. I'm an architect by education, and I jumped into building control. So from the same, I didn't go and join a building control course. I was an architect and then become a building surveyor, then building control inspector, and all of this. But guys, Neil, pleasure meeting you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm gonna have to shoot. I'll leave you in good hands with Jack. He'll finish off the conversation, but hopefully our paths cross again. And
brilliant stuff.
Enjoy
Cheers.
the rest of your evening.
Thanks.
Jack, I'll see you soon. Okay. See you later.
Cheers.
Okay,
Cheers.
bye.
Yeah, I think building control as a profession tends to pick you rather than you pick it. I think that's how I sort of jumped into it for.
But I think it is a great profession. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think we can depend on the colleges to necessarily promote it. I think it's down to the industry to promote themselves. One of the interesting things that we've been doing is we've had our apprentices going back to their schools of origin and talking about their experience having become a building trial apprentice. Which is two-found. It's promoting the profession, but actually it's a really good experience for the apprentices to have to go in and stand up in front of an audience of 50 or 60 of their peers and make a presentation, which probably before they came to us, they'd never thought of doing.
Yeah, we should
so,
and as well.
Sorry?
We'll work on the confidence as well, which
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think it is down to us as an industry. And, there's lots of, I think, initiatives that have gone on, whether it be LABC or ABCA, or whether individual companies initiatives to do that. Whether that's enough to raise our profile is a different matter. But it's a great profession. There's no escaping it. It's a great profession. So, and I think most people who come into it know not a lot about it, but then they get hooked, like you and I did, Jack.
Well, yeah, that's it. And I think my brother's getting to that point now where he's getting a lot more information, asking a lot more questions, wanting to understand the reasons why this is that. Like, he had a couple questions which I don't mind answering for him. I know he's local authority, but I don't mind the odd question he can put to me. But it's one of those. I like seeing him because even though he's my older brother, I do like to see that he's enjoying what he does now, and he's
my advice to anybody who's a mentor: there's no problem with people coming and asking you questions, but before you answer it, you ask them what they think the answer is first. And if they haven't got a clue, say, go away and work out what you think your answer is. Then we'll talk about it. But I think if you just become, I've got a problem, go to him, he'll tell you, it's a shortcut. That's not the way they're going to really, really learn. So, yeah, but no problem. And the networks are massive, and I still speak to. I go back into local authority quite a lot. I still know people with local authorities because, of course, on their side, they deal with stuff specifically, and you can read it all day long, but unless you know the realities of having to deal with it, so often I do call some of my old colleagues that are still in local authority. How are you exactly dealing with this? Because I'm reading it like this. Is that right? Kind of thing. So, and I don't think there's any problem in us cross talking. And there are a number of groups where people just get together, and I think people are more open to sharing information now because they understand that's the right way forward.
Yeah, with regardless of local authority or private, I think some collaboration is only going to make the industry better. Working together is with this ascent reversions. I think a lot of the private sector would be willing to and happy to help. I just think the way the legislation hasn't made it possible for a lot of the private sector to willingly help. It's not really geared up for that.
I have to say, that of course Ascent were a fairly large company, and I think most of us are probably geared up, and we look at our pipeline of work and we look at our existing portfolio, and most of us haven't got a lot of fat. We're running at the capacity, even if and if you've got growth plans in terms of your pipeline, you think, well, if all of these bids come in, we're going to need a couple more. But certainly, if you just snap your fingers and say, can you take these, 30 projects or whatever, forget the liability side of picking up a project that you've not worked with and you're not quite certain of its compliance, but actually who's got the capacity to do that? Because your first duty is to make sure you're performing your function on the projects that you've won and you're servicing already. And if you were to take on a substantial number of projects and that meant you start to fail in your delivery of service on the ones that were already on your books, that's wrong too. So there's a real, there's so many dilemmas coming out of the companies going into liquidation. And I genuinely don't know what the answer is. We all know what the consequences are. They're dire consequences for the clients, and it really is. It's sad. It's sad but I don't think there's a silver bullet to sort it out, to be honest, Jack. Because if you're going to take on work, you should be assuring yourself, I'm taking on this work, and I'm not picking up problems from it, So if it started on site, of course, if it's not starting on site, that's not a problem at all. It's the ones that are going on site that's a real issue. But, just to say, I'll take it and not be aware of the condition of work on site, I can understand why that failsafe is put into place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you would be interested in discussing, or are you happy we've covered most of?
Well, I think we covered loads of stuff I didn't think we were going to cover, to be honest, Jack.
So did I, to be honest.
Yeah, but no, and any time in the future, if you've got a subject area that you think I might be able to talk around, I'll be more than happy to come back. But it's been an enjoyable experience. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you. It's always good to have someone with a wealth of knowledge like yourself to come on. It's greatly appreciated.
Cheers.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.